it's a lot of fun, especially around St. Patrick's Day time. That's kind of like the Super Bowl for us, I guess you could say. We're super busy during that weekend. I've never probably played with such professional musicians. I think just about everyone in the band plays music as a trade. Rebecca, the cello player, she's a teacher. Karen's a music teacher as well. Tim sings and performs across the country. And Justin's a physics major, so I don't know if that counts for anything, but it is what it is.
1, 2, 3, 4.
For the stars and grab your wish, I guarantee it's how you get everything you need.
Teledonna brings a blend of music influenced by at least 4 generations and plays with energy and raw emotion. Don't miss Teledonna featuring Nancy Hubanks on vocals on the next edition of the Denver Loft Sessions.
What your mama gave ya.
No fear, there's plenty more to be had.
Partial funding for this season of the Denver Loft Sessions is provided by Venture Technologies, your local technology solutions provider. Visit them online at ventech.com.
Welcome to the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee meeting of Denver City Council. Full coverage of this session of the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee begins now.
morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning at the Land Use and Transportation Infrastructure Committee. I'm the chair, Councilman Amanda Sandoval, and let's start with our virtual participants, council, then we'll go around the room.
Good morning, Paul Cashman, South Denver, District 6.
Candy Sedavaca, District 9.
Thank you, and then I'll start on my left.
I'm not a committee member, Deborah Ortega at large.
Good morning, Kendra Black, District 4. Jamie Torres, District 3.
Joel Clark, District 7.
Thank you. First up on the agenda is Bill 1102, the Ortega Railroad Safety Bill. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Councilman Debbie Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, this is our railroad ordinance that I filed last year to come forward before council, and we wanted to complete the risk analysis that was done by HNTB. We don't have the final report yet, but when they came and gave an update on what they were finding in that report, we also still needed to complete some of the conversations with city stakeholders. We're now in the process of doing conversations with property owners that are along the freight corridors, and that may shape some changes to the ordinance along with input from the city agencies. So we want to complete that work. And what I plan to do today is move to postpone any action on this ordinance until April 25th, 2023. And then that will allow us the time to get that work done and look at whether or not we're going to amend that ordinance or just come back with a new ordinance, and I'll withdraw the one that we have before us. So I can't officially move this because I'm not a voting member, but if someone could take that action to move it, then the goal is to bring it back on April 25th, 2023.
Thank you. So I'll make the motion to postpone to a date certain, April 25th. I have made the motion. We have a second by Councilman Black. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we'll see you back here on April 25th. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Next up, we have 0243 CPD rezoning of 640 Tennessee Street, Tennessee Avenue.
Good morning. My name is Edson Ibanez. I am with CPD, and before you today, we have 640 West Tennessee Avenue. So this is an application that's going from a light industrial use to an industrial mixed use up to 5 stories. And so the property itself, as you can see, it's located in Council District 7 and Councilman Members Clark's district, and it's located in the Alkmaar Park neighborhood. So the request you can see in the red highlighted in the middle is just south of Vanderbilt Park. It's an industrial use currently operated by an auto repair shop and a flooring shop. And it's just about approximately 1.6 acres. So the proposal, like I mentioned, it's an industrial mixed use up to 5 stories for the site. So the zoning is classified as light industrial UL2, which stands for the billboard use overlay. So the applicant is not intending to maintain the billboard use overlay. Just the context, the land use is industrial, but if you were to stand on the corner of Tennessee and Fox looking southwest, you can kind of see this industrial 1 to 2 story building here, as you can see on the top left. And then the bottom left is also looking west as well, looking east at the subject property. Now these pictures on the bottom, on the top left is Vanderbilt Park looking north, and then on the west you see an office kind of industrial building immediately adjacent to the subject property. So far, this has gone out for informational notice back in 9/20, and it was there are some revisions that the applicant made to the application, and it was resubmitted back in November. It went before planning board recently in February. It was approved unanimously by the planning board, and it is before you today, and it is scheduled for City Council public hearing in April 24th. And so far, we have received 2 public comments. 2 of those are letters of support from adjacent property owners that are just in support of the project. So for any map amendment to rezoning, there are 5 review criteria that must be analyzed that are consistent with the Denver zoning code. And so I will jump into these. So the first one is consistency with adopted plans. And so we're looking at 3 specific plans, which are Comprehensive Plan 2040, Blueprint Denver of 2019, and the I-25 and Broadway Station Area Plan of 2016. So when we're looking at comprehensive plan, there are several different strategies that are highlighted within the staff report, but I'm just going to talk about a few here. So the first one, under the equitable, affordable, inclusive Goal 1, Strategy A, increase development of housing units close to transit and mixed-use developments, as well as Goal 2, Strategy A, create a greater mix of housing options in every neighborhood for all individuals and families. And then under the environmentally resilient Goal 8, Strategy A, promote infill development where infrastructures and services are already in place, as well as encourage mixed-use communities where residents can live, work, and play in their own neighborhoods. Now, when we look at Blueprint specifically, Blueprint classifies this as a district under the future neighborhood context. So within districts, something that wants to highlight is that residential uses are largely limited to the campus and innovation flex district place types. And so when we're looking at the place types, this area is classified as innovation flux, where multi-unit residential is compatible. Fox, Tennessee are local streets, but when we look at Mississippi, Mississippi is a mixed-use arterial, which is just 1 block to the south, as well as you have some industrial collectors in close proximity as well. Within the growth area strategy for this area, it's classified as district, where we anticipate to see 15% of new employment, as well as 5% of new housing in these locations. There is some policy within Blueprint under the Land Use and Built Form Economics Policy Section 3, Strategy D, that talks about innovation flex districts should enable housing and other uses to complement manufacturing, promote an urban pedestrian-friendly building form that are appropriate for vibrant mixed-use districts. And then when we actually jump into the I-25 and Broadway Station Area Plan, which is in close proximity here, the site itself is classified as industrial mixed use with up to 5 stories. So those are the 2 maps that you can see here. Within that, there's recommendations about industrial mixed use, such as continue to support industrial and industrial mixed use uses at strategic locations, and it labels this site a strategic location, which specifically says rezone the parcels immediately south of Tennessee to industrial mixed use in order to help activate Vanderbilt Park West by allowing these blocks to transition to residential, commercial, and industrial mixed-use projects. In regards to criteria 2, 3, and 5, it is consistent as found in the staff report. For the 4th criteria, justifying circumstances, it is consistent based that there has been change in changing conditions. Specifically along Broadway, there's been a lot of change given the station, as well as city adopted plans where the small area plan specifically calls for industrial mixed use. Therefore, CPD recommends approval based that all the findings of the review criteria have been met. I am available for any questions you might have, and the applicant is also here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Currently, we have no speakers in the queue. Given that we have no speakers, do we have a motion to move this forward? We have a motion by Councilman Clark, and we have a second by President Torres. Thank you. We'll see you at City Council. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Bill 0260, the National Western Center Framework Agreement Amendment.
I don't know. This. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Jen Wellborn with the Mayor's Office. I'm here to talk about some exciting steps that we're taking to amend the existing framework agreement for the National Western Center. So just a quick reminder of what the framework agreement is. The framework agreement is a binding agreement among the city, the Colorado State University, the Stock Show, and the National Western Center Authority, which it created. The term of that is expected to be 100 years. It's 50 years and 2 25-year extensions. It created the National Western Center Authority in order for the authority to be the governance structure for programming, operations, and maintenance of the new National Western Center. It provided for the contributions for the funding of the construction of the center, and it included a master lease with the National Western Center Authority and other documents that outline the relationships among the parties. The authority itself is the composition of the authority and its duties are outlined in the framework agreement. And it includes, with some specificity, the requirements for the board of directors. It was created as a Colorado nonprofit in 2018 and has a 13-member board of directors to provide guidance and oversight for the staff of the authority. The current board has 13 members, 11 voting and 2 non-voting. The mayor has 6 appointments. Those appointments are confirmed by council. CSU has 2 appointments. The Stock Show has 2 appointments. And then the mayor appoints 2 community members, one of which is voting and one is non-voting. And both of those are confirmed by city council. The city CFO sits ex officio as a non-voting member of the board. And for those of you who were here in 2017, we had quite a bit of conversation about the composition of the board at the time. And we were, you will recall, concerned with preserving the balance of power and influence on the board, given the funding structure. And so the board structure reflects that funding. And so at the time, we had a voting member of the community, and the community asked us for a second member, which we added as non-voting so as to not upset that balance. So currently, both of the community directors, which you'll recall, one is voting, one is non-voting currently, the mayor appoints, and they have to be a resident of one of the GES neighborhoods, Globeville, Elyria, Swansea neighborhoods. They must demonstrate a strong commitment to an understanding of those neighborhoods, both the residents and businesses, and they are subject to confirmation by city council. The new proposed requirements are why we're here today. So we are proposing a change to the framework agreement, which is necessary because the framework agreement sets out the requirements for the board of directors for the National Western Center Authority. We're proposing that the non-voting seat be made a voting seat so that there would be 2 voting community members on the board. I'm gonna let Brad Buchanan, who is the executive director of the National Western Center Authority, talk more about his important work that he, with his leadership that the authority has been doing to talk to the community about its concerns and needs and wishes for the campus and for the operation of the National Western Center Authority. But this slide lays out the new requirements. So the board of directors, at the request of the community, has requested that the city and CSU and the Stock Show consent to the changes to the framework agreement that are in front of you today. The governing boards of the authority, CSU and the Stock Show, have consented and signed the proposed amendment that's in front of you. And that results in an even number of voting seats. So we had a tiebreaker that we felt like didn't preserve the existing board composition, which is that there's a designated director in the framework agreement already. Each member gets a designated director that can serve as many terms as that appointing authority wants them to. And so our proposal is that the city's designated director have 2 votes in the case of a tie on the board. I think Brad will tell you it's been it's not been the case. And one of the reasons why we're here today is that we feel really comfortable with the operation of the authority board, and that a tie vote has not been our experience that that's common. And here's the proposed council action, but I want to ask Brad to talk more about his work with the community and focus on this important step.
Morning, everyone. Been a lot of conversations going on with the community at the National Western Center. It's been very exciting the last couple of years as the new facilities are coming online, as additional facilities are under construction. Stock show has happened in 22 and 23 on the campus. Colorado State University's PER campus is up and running. Our Stockyards Event Center is running. Riverfront will open up this spring. We've broken ground on the Livestock Center. There's a lot happening. And so we've really been getting into some substantive conversations with community. And in order to make those productive, we've had to sort of back up and find out what were the assumptions in the framework agreement? Where do they work? Where could they be improved? Where can our processes be improved? We've done a lot of work around our procurements, how very high bar we hold for community and local and small business involvement in our procurements. And this topic, as we've just had a long conversation with community about the roles and responsibilities of the community board seat members, both to take in information from the community and to put information from the National Western Center out to the community. And in that conversation, the question came up of why is the second seat not a voting seat? And so we had long conversations with the community, went to our board. To a person, to an entity, everyone 100% supportive of making this change. As Jen mentioned, it's not a contentious board. While there are votes, the process is very much consensus built with the partners and with community. And so with this tie break mechanism in place, we're certainly comfortable that functionally this is an improvement. And the punchline is it's just the right thing to do. The community, they are our partners, and we treat them as such. And this is a step that we think is important in walking that talk. Happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you for all the work. First up, we have President Torres in the queue.
Thank you so much. Just a quick question. I'm looking at the website for the board members. There's 12 there. Is that because, Brad, you are the 13th?
Currently, one of the seats is vacant, and we've held it vacant because the community is going through a process to make a recommendation for who would fill that board seat. Hope in the next couple of months to be back to you with that name.
Okay.
There is a vacant seat today.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's the only question I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councilwoman Sita Baca.
Just want to thank you, Brad, and to the rest of the authority for finally honoring this request from the community. I recall way before coming to council, pulling this actual vote in the Citizen Advisory Committee, and we did not get to vote on it, but there was full support from the community for this. And so I appreciate you all making this change, and I look forward to more collaboration with the community and the National Western Center campus. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say I started with the city before you even had this board. I was in Councilman Montero's office when we actually set up this board. And I'm appreciative of the work that you all have done to have community members and to make sure that you're reflecting the voices of the community, to have a voting member that as this neighborhood has changed and has this project has been so catalytic in that neighborhood. We want to make sure that those voices who are there are continuing to have a voice at the table. So I just appreciate all the effort, and having to bring back the whole entire framework agreement is a lot of work that's not easily done. So just want to acknowledge that work as well. We have a motion by Councilwoman Black. We have a second by President Torres. Seeing no other concerns or anything from my colleagues, we'll see you at City Council. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a few items on consent. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Luke. Seeing no other further action before this body, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Friable granite mountains, and they were quite dangerous to work in.
When I look through immigration and naturalization records from southern Colorado, many miners actually bore the marks of the coal industry on their bodies. That extended from missing limbs, missing fingers, to what miners call coal tattoos, bluish black marks on their bodies that consisted of coal that had been blasted into their skin.
The first question after a mine accident was, how was the mule? Miners could be easily replaced.
The miners always face this devil's bargain. Should they try to get more coal out of the ground, or should they take more care with their safety? They were generally paid only for the coal that they brought out of the earth. They weren't paid for laying new track, timbering, all these sorts of things that were necessary for efficient and for safe production.
Colorado Fuel and Iron operated a feudal kingdom in southern Colorado. Every aspect of their lives was controlled.
The coal camps were often fenced off. Only certain people could go in and out. The safety conditions were terrible. In Warfano County alone, nearly 500 miners died underground.
I think it's pretty clear that the overarching purpose of the company towns was really to control workers, and in particular to prevent the United Mine Workers from gaining a foothold in southern Colorado. CF&I had its own detective agency. Coal companies often employed the Pinkerton Detective Agency, so they were spying on workers who were trying to organize. They used violence against people who they suspected of organizing, beating them up, throwing them out of the company towns, denying them employment.
Mother Jones was known as the most dangerous woman in America. Mary Harris was an Irish immigrant who came to the United States and worked as a school teacher and a dressmaker. Tragically, she lost her entire family to yellow fever, both her husband and her children. And when that happened, Mother Jones decided that she really should be the mother of the working class. And so by the 1890s, she was one of the most active and charismatic and energetic labor organizers in the country. Wherever she went, press attention followed.
The miners met in a conference in Trinidad in September of 1913. Mother Jones, she said, if you men are too cowardly to vote to go on strike, there are enough women in the county to beat the hell out of you. If it's strike or slavery, strike until the last one of you drops dead.
And when those workers voted to strike in the fall of 1913, they weren't just fighting for better pay or better working conditions. They were actually fighting for the right to live freely, for the right to exercise their rights as American citizens, to not be surrounded by armed guards, to not have to live by the laws and the creed of the company.
Two main operators controlled the properties above Ludlow: Colorado Fuel and Iron, which was the Rockefeller family, and Victor American, which was where John C. Osgood had gone after selling most of his interest in CF&I.
One thing that John C. Osgood always stressed in his anti-union tirades was that the union leaders, they were anarchists, socialists. They were doing that for their own self-interest, not the interest of the miners.
Coal companies in the Great Coal Strike put together sort of an informal alliance and sent representatives to collude with each other, really, in order to manage the strike. It's debatable at any given point how much John D. Rockefeller Jr. really knew about what was going on in the day-to-day operations of the strike, but he had a delegate, and that was Lamont Bowers, the local manager for CF&I. Bowers reflected the attitude of the Rockefellers and of Osgood that unions were a danger to free enterprise.
The strike could have been prevented had Osgood and Bowers been willing to meet with the union leaders. They refused to do that. The operators would not even enter the same room with the union leaders.
To go on strike meant you're homeless. And they went out onto the plains of Colorado in what was the record-breaking snowstorm in the winter of 1913-1914. Snow drifts 3, 4, 5 feet high. And they stayed out on strike for 15 months. They lived as families in canvas tents heated by a coal stove.
Ludlow was just one of more than 10 tent colonies that the Union had established up and down the hogbacks of Las Animas, Huerfano, and Fremont counties to house workers who'd been evicted from company housing. The Ludlow colony had this strategic position that it could use to try to stop the flow of strike breakers into the mines above. If they could band together, if they could get every single mine worker to walk off the job, they could literally turn off the lights in Colorado, and they could place CF&I under immense pressure to resolve the dispute, to recognize the UMW, and to make further concessions to its employees.
I think the most important thing about the Coalfield War that people forget is that there's violence all the way through that strike. The Union gave as good as it got.
At the beginning of the Colorado National Guard militia's intervention, both sides perceived the militia as a neutral force. And it seems like, by and large, this is how the militia behaved.
By April of 1914, soldiers' enlistments are running out. Most of them have not been paid. They're farmers, they're school teachers, they're laborers. They want to go back and make some money. The bills are stacking up. So they leave the field. The governor and Brigadier General John Chase make it official and begin to withdraw the troops. John Chase decides to deputize some of the mine guards so that there's still some kind of security for the replacement workers. It doesn't take long for those in the tent colony to see what's going on. The mine guards are beginning to don some of the Colorado National Guard uniforms and man Colorado National Guard machine guns.
By the dawn of April 20th, 1914, Governor Ammons had reduced the size of the Guard deployment. They felt quite vulnerable. You had two sides that deeply distrusted the other. There was no voice of reason, no neutral power. Once the shooting started, and I think to this day nobody really knows who shot first, both sides really put into motion their contingency plans. For the strikers, they pulled out their weapons in a nearby arroyo, and they tried to draw fire away from the Ludlow tent colony. By that point, most of the women and children had probably been put into the cellars that had been dug beneath the tents as a response to the gunfights that had already become a common feature of daily life at Ludlow. That left the tent colony vulnerable. So by the afternoon, the militia come down into Ludlow itself, and tents start to burn. Strikers said that the militiamen intentionally set fire to them. The Colorado National Guard generally maintained that the strikers were using exploding bullets. Fire begins to really rage, and it's that fire that draws out the oxygen from one large cellar. That's the cellar that would go on to be known as the Black Hole of Ludlow. This is the cellar in which several women and children were found, most all of them dead.
The 11 children and 2 women were suffocated. Over 75 people were killed, both in the massacre that day and in the ensuing violence.
With the intensity, the brutality, the misery of the miners' effort at self-determination, to have that turn into an episode of families in tents being treated as military targets. It does get every form of attention from major political figures. It gets attention from national newspapers. It gets attention from the commission appointed by Congress.
It's certainly near the top of the list of the bloodiest events in the history of the American labor movement. Before the Coalfield War, Rockefeller just sent a few telegrams. Do what you need to do. We're going to beat that union. after Ludlow, when he wakes up and there are people with black armbands marching outside his office, he becomes much more interested in labor policy.
Osgood did not show any remorse. He always contended that it was the strikers. They were the ones who caused all of the violence. John D. Rockefeller did show some remorse over the Ludlow massacre. This meant that CF&I broke from Osgood and the other co-operators. That break destroyed Osgood's power and influence in Colorado. Osgood died in January of 1926, upstairs in his bedroom at Cleveholme Manor. He was almost a forgotten man.
The soundest industrial policy is that which has constantly in mind the welfare of the employees as well as the making of profit. The day has passed when the conception of industry as chiefly a revenue-producing process can be maintained. John D. Rockefeller, Jr.
Rockefeller engaged in a massive PR campaign to try to turn his image around. He came back to Colorado in 1915 and he visited CF&I and he visited the Southern Colorado coalfields, and there are photographs of him and he's wearing a brand new set of dungaree overalls as if he's a working man. And he talks to the workers and he tells them, together we can improve conditions, we can make things right. And he creates the employee representation